So Sharon, what sustains you?
Thank you for asking, Serge. Uh, at the deepest level, the I think the delight of just being alive, moment to moment. Um, I can look out my window and I can see the sky and trees and the wind, and just knowing I'm part of that is actually almost a little overwhelming.
Mhm.
It deeply nourishes me. The trees in front of me. And it's so amazing as you watch the movement of the wind, how everything is so alive. And then I continue to get a sense of an inner aliveness from simply just being alive in this environment.
Yeah, yeah. So you're talking about that joy of being alive.
I think so. I
Yeah.
think that I hadn't put the word joy onto it, but as you mentioned the joy, and I see your face and the joy. Yeah, yeah, it feels a little shy almost to call it joy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe we're staying at that place that's at the edge of the enjoyment of it and a little bit of shyness about maybe being a little careful about how it's called.
Yeah. Uh, and when you say the word careful, I'm thinking of the fullness of care
Mm.
and um, and how with the attention to aliveness, that fullness comes. When I take my attention away and go into pondering and obsessing and figuring it out and solutions, then somehow that fullness of care seems to be depleted.
Mm.
And so, how to keep coming back and forth
Yeah.
to this fullness?
Yeah, yeah. So that sense of fullness, and so the word carefulness brings you to fullness,
Yeah.
and there is mindfulness in that. That sense of making a very conscious decision to where you're choosing where your mind goes.
Yeah, and where my mind and body go together. When
Yeah.
my mind seems to go off on its own and not take my body with it, it seems to get in trouble. It depletes me. But if I can get my mind and body kind of collaborating and cooperating, then and the word mindfulness is describes that for me. So
Yeah.
bringing that together, then the then this participation in life has a freshness, a wholeness, an authenticity, moment to moment that's different from one moment to the next.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I really liked your phrase. There's something about when my mind goes on its own and forgets my body or something like that. And so there's something very, very visual in it that had almost like these silent movie comedies, very physical, and I could imagine the mind going away on its own and the body kind of feeling side, you know,
Yeah. Wouldn't that be fun to do a skit like that? My goodness. I could just see it would be fascinating how how we do get, particularly the culture we live in,
Yeah.
we do get caught in those dynamics without even knowing it often,
Mm-hmm.
kind of catching ourselves in it. And then, okay, here we go. Let's make friends again with the body and the mind and get back on the same page. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder about the word mindfulness sometimes, that if we're just mindful without the body's collaboration, where that takes us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you.
Or is it possible actually to be mindful without the body's collaboration?
Right, right. And does the word mindfulness remind us of that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, when we started this conversation, you're talking about that great satisfaction, that joy maybe that you have, being, you know, noticing how beautiful the day is or the environment, and so that noticing is something that comes from the senses. It's not just something where you go into ideas, into abstraction.
Right. And I think even before the senses, it comes into kind of a decision of perception.
Mm-hmm.
What in this moment do I want to open and perceive, so that we make choices all the time, conscious and unconscious, about what we perceive. And if we do choose to perceive sensation, then that's the starting point for me of mindfulness.
Yeah. So it's not something where you're saying that the default mode is to be aware of sensations, but it really is a conscious decision based on a lifetime of experience. What is it that you want to put your attention to?
Right.
And yeah.
And perhaps in other cultures or other times, when I'm not interacting within the culture, like when I'm on a sailboat or I'm hiking, I don't have to work so hard
Mm-hmm.
making that choice. Is right there. It's easy to sustain that. But living in our culture where it feels like there's just a flood of fear going on that keeps people in a hyper aroused state or in a real hypo aroused state, that these decisions need to be made over and over.
Yeah.
I feel like I can get kind of co-opted, caught sometimes in the fears that are generated within our culture.
Yeah. So the contrast between, say, an activity like hiking or being on a sailboat, where presumably it's not just that you have to do things, but you also feel safe doing them, or there's a sense of competence in doing them, so that you're supported by that. And in contrast, those moments where you and all of us are caught into some kind of an atmosphere of fear.
Yes, and you really organized that beautifully the way you said that. And I think that the work you do around trauma, the work I do around trauma, is a choice to meet that fear and not to just avoid it, but to
Mm-hmm.
and to bring attention to it in the same way that you'd bring attention to a fast-moving storm or to a sudden shift in the wind. That
Mm-hmm.
you come into an awareness that here's fear in one of its many disguises.
Yeah, and so when you're saying that, something comes up for me
Ah,
that I'm going to, take my time
please.
articulating, because it's a mix of uh, different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one thing that strikes me there is when you use the comparison with a storm,
Mm-hmm.
and it brings me to say, when we read about the experience of people, tribes, or civilizations that live much closer to nature, where people are trackers, where they notice the signs, and so the what's happening in the air, what's happening in the sky, the trees, the branches, the what's on the ground. All of that speaks to them.
That's right. Their
Yeah,
perception is open to it.
yeah, yeah. And so there's that part. And
Right.
then the other part that I hear in what you say is something about how, we don't really have that in our life. We might kind of push a little bit to have a little more of it in order to be close to nature. But in some ways, say for instance, in the work we do, that facing the trauma and facing the ways in which the challenges of modern life manifest um, actually brings us to a state that might be in some way similar to the state of these people who are close to nature are with nature. And we kind of do that with human nature.
Interesting. Nice. Nice. And it brings back, I spent a number of years working with Indigenous people in Canada. And I remember the main thing I think I learned in terms of adversity is, first of all, we need to prepare for it so it's not foreign to us. So it is our
Mm-hmm.
nature, so that we don't consider it an aberration, but it's part of the whole. And so that preparing and becoming strong for it. The word resilience is used a lot, but I keep thinking of building this inner strength to meet it in its intensity, because it's simply just more intense. And then if we can be present to the intensity, that intensity seems to start to have a calmness about it. It slows it down. So how do we meet that in a way that we can be there and experience the intensity of this nature, and yet hold a calm, not get caught in fear because of intensity?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm hearing that sense of having a roadmap of life where the challenges, the dangers are part of that roadmap.
Yes. And particularly as we're facing a roadmap of the future that we don't know how to traverse. We don't know what's coming. And perhaps the ancients, the people that have lived close to the land, to the water and the wind and the sun, those people, their wisdom can help us find a new path for humanity as we face the new challenges of our climate, of our globe.
Yeah, yeah. So there's something about that the challenges of the past and the people who gained wisdom in facing them
Right.
Are relevant, even though the circumstances are different, because there is something in the facing and in the attitude of facing and in the attitude of the preparation that comes from the facing that can actually be transmitted and that we can make use of.
Yes, thank you. And I love the way you're using the word facing. And yes, yes. And then the smile, your face.
I was consciously avoiding the word confronting, to think that the confrontation has
Yeah,
that connotation of enemies,
that's right.
and facing is being present.
Yes, yes. And when we face each other,
Yeah.
uh, then we don't know what's going to happen. That there's a mystery in deeply facing each
Mm-hmm.
other. We don't know what's going to be generated, what's going to synchronize between us that's never existed before.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that facing
yeah,
is actually inherently something where there is some unpredictability.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes you hear the word subjectivity and then intersubjectivity, and like your own experience of facing adversity or facing intensity, and my experience of facing that adversity intensity, my subjective and your subjective comes together.
Mm-hmm.
And when it can align and kind of synchronize, then some kind of a movement happens, something that takes us, using your term, the path,
Mm-hmm.
takes us together on a path, something to experiment, explore, create
Mm-hmm.
together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so you're talking about when we're facing each other,
Yeah,
you come with your subjectivity, your
yeah,
past experiences, the impact they've had on you. I come with my subjectivity and the impact my experiences have had on me. And in some way, in the meeting point, there's something in which there's a possibility of having a sense of understanding or resonating with some parts of experience.
yes. And it's precisely in that facing that resonating and that attuning happens, that opens possibilities that haven't existed before.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're creating a new path,
Mm-hmm.
connectivity of facing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're creating a new path with the connectivity of facing.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So can we stay with that a little bit more, so
yeah,
that,
it's
yeah,
exciting, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah,
creating a new path with the connectivity of facing.
yeah.
So the thing that comes from me, when I stay with it, is related to the word connectivity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and so connectivity brings the idea of, for connectivity, there has to be some kind of, at least some commonality, something that uh, permits that connection. So it's kind of, by definition, um, having the intentionality to find what is in common, what binds experiences. So, and I'm kind of articulating as I speak. I'm not really,
Mm-hmm.
but what comes up, the more I speak, is a sense of something similar to what you were saying before about making a shift, where you want to put your attention on. And so this is, evokes for me the sense of making the shift towards what might be connecting us as opposed to what might be separating or what might
Right.
be, yeah.
And then entering into that connecting, that's the path, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's where the energy lies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as you bring up the connectivity, what kind of comes to me is this vast interconnectivity of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
way beyond just our planet, and
Yeah.
how this dynamic is the very source and essence of aliveness, kind of going back to, um, and without connectivity, we're so isolated and alone. And our work around trauma, to me, is the loss of that connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
It the breach of the natural connectivity that exists, particularly between humans as we face each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that essentially that's the breach of trust that we are evolved to have that sense of trust and connection.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so when something breaches that trust,
Yeah.
is the trauma that then is interfering with the ability to connect.
And that breach of trust, and you so beautifully say that, that breach of trust then becomes the obstacle that's right there, keeping us from even the most subtle connections, like with the wind or the light or the sun or the air. And besides just the human disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
um, so that the loss of aliveness is ever present with that loss of trust.
Yeah, yeah. So we're putting together the concept, the experience of aliveness,
Mm-hmm.
of connection,
Right,
of trust,
right.
and not just among in between human beings, but between human beings and our environment.
Yeah, other living species.
Mm-hmm.
I spent this summer, at least 10, 12 days of it up in a mountaintop in British Columbia, at an amazing retreat center in Nelson. And our topic was spiritual trauma and healing, restoring the soul. And it was kind of amazing to have a small group of people who really wanted to reconnect, not only with themselves, but with the rhythm of that mountain, with the lake that was below it, with the trees, with the insects. That this interconnectivity became the healing.
Mm-hmm.
This breach of trust, wherever it was, however it happened, the healing was simply in the reconnection.
Yeah, yeah. So the healing is in the reconnection.
Yeah.
And as we put our attention to shift, our mind toward connecting, we can experience those areas where, in some way, the trauma of breach of trust prevents us from doing it fully or prevents us from doing it at all.
Or yeah, opening to it, because it's always right there.
Yeah.
And there's simply, do I drop down into that place, that state, that my organism, my cellular structure can start to open fully to the environment.
Yeah, yeah. So that image it's not the image of striving, it's not the image of effort. It's actually a natural state in which we open to.
That's right. That's how I get it. And that's where so much of the body-centered work seems to kind of get reduced to a technique or a striving.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, the healing is not in the striving. Maybe it's in the striving to create the safety that
Mm-hmm.
allows the body to connect, to reconnect,
Yeah.
allows the heart and the face to come back into that, like you used the word attunement or resonance and alignment and synchrony, these dynamics of connectivity, so that we have to create that safety to drop down into it.
Yeah. 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 So that there's a clarity about what the work is. And it's not that pushing, but that sense of allowing, and that the obstacle,
Right.
that thing of corresponds to the phrase being in your own way, is actually fear,
Yeah.
lack of safety,
Yeah.
that prevents us from allowing, because under fear we
Yeah.
kind of tense up in order to protect ourselves. So
Right.
there's a very, very simple image of it takes safety to have that allowing,
That's right.
to
That's
find the
right.
connection.
If we tense up, that contraction of tensing up, and we maintain it, we can get kind of a mastery in the moment.
Yeah.
The ultimate healing of every cell is to restore that contraction expansion rhythm, and so that there is a time to prepare to really drop down and open and connect, and then there's a time to breathe in and to have the contractions. So this rhythm, restoring this rhythm
Yeah.
that allows us to connect, particularly on the facial level.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what you're emphasizing here is that when we're talking about that dropping the tension, is not to get to a state where the tension will be dropped and a flat line, but is actually that, what is important is that rhythm,
Yeah,
that expansion, contraction.
that's right. And that's what I like to think of as our level of optimal arousal.
Mm-hmm.
How much can I experience the contraction around me, the hyperarousal around me? Or how much can I experience the hypo, that flatness, and still stay in this rhythm of connection?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
Porges might call it, the ventral vagal, the facing,
Yeah.
connected
Yeah.
on a cellular alive level.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're not trying to get a narrow range of experience, a narrow range of our nervous system activation, but we're actually, increasing our ability to go into a very high or very low part of the range. And that once we get to one, we're not stuck there, but there's actually that possibility of actually flowing. Um, yeah.
And you've said it so beautifully. I wonder, Serge, if you have a word for it. I like the word resilience, but there's a bigger word that I haven't found yet.
Yeah, no, I love that sense that you're questioning. That it would be great to find a perfect word, but in some way, very very close second best to me is noticing how the word is inadequate to capture the whole experience. and and enlist people into saying, it's kind of like this, but there's something missing to it. And so you have to supply your own meaning for it, or your own, whatever resonates for you in order to capture that experience.
Thank you. You're right. So we each, because of our subjective experience, then can find the word that's best for us in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
A combination of words.
Yeah, or a combination of knowing that there's something about resilience, that there's something about healing, there's something about flowing. There's a combination of all these words. There's also, maybe the closest word that would come to it is when you used aliveness. But of course, aliveness does not just capture that image for people, so they might not see that experience. But it certainly has a lot of that experience of what it is to be alive and to be able to go through this, as opposed to being just in one small portion of experience.
Right, and to go back to our earlier, how to meet and face these other dynamics while we're maintaining our own internal rhythm and optimal arousal of aliveness.
Yeah.
So we don't go too far or too low and somehow damage our own moment-to-moment cellular activity. I've gotten really intrigued by cells lately, and how the activity of the cell and its relationship with the other cells around it, it's kind of a microcosm of our humanity, our interconnection with each other. And
So essentially, that there is a general pattern of how living things live, and they live in interaction. And so the cell is a very basic form of that interaction. It is a cell, and of course, it is very interconnected. And so this is what happens. And that's Yeah.
And then if you're kind of fascinated by the cell, the mitochondria. A
Hmm.
couple of years ago, I was talking to Allan Schore, and I said, Allan, where is this trauma work going? What do we look toward? And he said the word mitochondria. And I got really intrigued by mitochondria. And I've just
So you
been,
want to say more about that?
well, I'm so intrigued that mitochondria has its own DNA.
Hmm.
And that there are literally millions of mitochondria in the cells of our body. And within just a few moments of feeling disconnected or threatened, the mitochondria stops their activity of bringing aliveness. And so when the mitochondria then starts to dim, I think of them as kind of bright lights of aliveness in us. And as it starts to dim, then our whole organism begins to dim. And
Hmm.
what is it? And then the whole illness, chronic disease, seems to be tied in. A lot of the research is showing. So, how do we as human beings sustain and nurse our mitochondria so that this cellular activity, this interconnectedness can happen? And I know so little about it. That's where
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But so at the same time, is that sense of, you said when the brightness dims in the mitochondria,
yeah,
is also when our brightness dims.
yes,
And so the experience of being less alive or feeling more sick um, is the experience of the mitochondria dimming.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And the mitochondria, uh, according to Antonio Damasio, has a different bacterial kind of origin than other parts of the body. Uh,
Hmm.
that it's only passed down through the mother genetically. Lots of mystery. There's this place of mystery deep in this center of aliveness that
Hmm.
to wonder and to have curiosity uh, seems to brighten the mitochondria. I don't
Yeah.
know.
But so what I'm also noticing is
Uh-huh.
that, there is for you a sense of very deep curiosity about this mystery.
Yes.
And that deep curiosity and the sense of the mystery there, it really seems to brighten you up.
Yeah. It's like I keep pondering the word wonderful, you know,
Hmm.
that the more you get entranced with the essence of life and wonder about it, the fullness comes. Again, careful, the fullness, the wonder, the full of wonder. And here's the joy of life, going back to our beginning.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, the wonder.
yeah. So curiosity,
Yeah,
wonder,
yeah,
joy, fullness.
yeah. And it can be so intentional. So that if I experience, let's say, some kind of a breach of trust, and instead of blaming the other,
Hmm.
I start to wonder, I'm wondering what their experience is. That leaves such a different space for reopening a connection than the blame or the assertion of some kind of intention that the other might have had.
Yeah, yeah. But I see how wonder is very different from worry,
Yeah,
because worry is something that's kind of narrowing, you
yeah.
know, and wonder is a sense of opening.
A sense of opening. Yeah, it could be this. And then ultimately there is this mystery that we can never wonder enough about.
Hmm. Yeah. Mm. So there is this sense of mystery that you can never wonder enough about. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does this feel like a good place to end, or do you want to, just check if you something more you want to say?
I'm good with this. Anything you'd like to say? I'm wondering.
Yeah, I like that concept of ending on that note of wonder,
Nice.
because it's the opposite of an ending. It's that sense of opening up. It kind of ties back to what you were talking about in the beginning. And
Uh-huh.
so there's also that symmetrical quality, but that's also that it then kind of, opens things up. And so, it's not an ending, but it's something else that begins.
That's right. Well, what a lovely way to express it. Thank you. So that we stay connected in the wonder.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, I really like that note that the wonder is a way to stay connected. Staying connected in wonder is a
Yeah.
nice phrase to share. Yeah,
Wondering together.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.